Ecology is the study of the relationships among organisms and the environment. It's that relationship between the living things and the non-living factors that can determine where they live. Ecologists seek to understand the interactions among the living and non-living components in a given ecosystem. You probably remember this figure from previously in the semester, but it shows us the relationship between an organism and its surrounding environment. A population consists of interbreeding organisms of one species occupying the same area at the same time. Recall that a population is the smallest size unit upon which natural selection may act upon. A community includes all the populations, so it's not just one single species, but multiple species all living in the same place. This could include the plants, animals, bacteria, all of the different species present. An ecosystem is the living plus the non-living things together in one place. And the biosphere is the largest scale in which all parts of the planet where life exists is possible. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can describe the difference between abiotic, which is non-living, and biotic, which is living, components of the environment in which we live. In the next section of our textbook, we're going to talk about how ecologists study habitats. Recall that a habitat is the physical location where the members of a population live. For example, this clump of palm trees grows on the beach in a very dry habitat, and this group of penguins lives in a very rocky or icy habitat. Population density can be determined by simply calculating the number of individuals of a species per unit area or unit volume in a given habitat. For example, an ecologist might say that these penguins live in dense, uniformly spaced populations, but these palm trees grow in clumps on the dunes in which they live. Estimating population size also is of interest to many ecologists. Let's think about the penguins for a moment. How can we determine the population when there are so many penguins in such a hostile, freezing cold environment? Well, the number one technique is aerial photos. Our entire globe is surrounded by satellites, and we can use that satellite imaging to estimate population size. In this photo on your screen, we can see an aerial view of the penguins huddled together trying to stay warm in Antarctica. Number two is we can do a sampling subset in which we just estimate the overall population by counting a small subset of a larger population. And then lastly, for many animals, we use mark and recapture, in which by using radio tracking collars and other types of devices, such as this collar around the leg of this bird, it can allow us to track where they go and figure out how we can count them. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can discuss the importance of calculating population density. Imagine scientists wish to estimate how a squirrel population will change over time. We can ask ourselves, what factors might you need to consider when you're determining a population's growth rate? Well, births and deaths are the two factors that affect population size. Let's start with birth. Both birth and migration into a population increases our population's size. These additions are important to understand when we're studying these populations. Further, we can calculate birth rate, which is the number of individuals produced per unit of time. Deaths and migrations out of the population decrease the population size. So to think about the squirrel population that we were using as a case in point, we could think about squirrels having these accidental deaths or having diseases or getting eaten because they're a part of a food web. And then we can also think of the squirrels as migrating out of their given habitat. And just like we can calculate birth rate, we can also calculate the death rate, which is the number of deaths per unit of time. A population's age structure is the distribution of the age classes in a given area. And these distribution of age classes, when understood by an ecologist, can help us to determine whether a population is growing, stable, or declining. So we're going to examine these figures now from your textbook. In this first graph, it shows a population of white oak trees. And based on the data in this graph, we can see that the population has mostly young individuals, indicating a high potential for future growth. The dying trees are simply replaced with many young trees. On the other hand, this cottonwood tree population has very few baby trees, indicating that reproductive success is low. Therefore, the population size will decline as dying trees are not replaced with the young trees. Ecologists also find it useful to determine the population death rate in a given place. And survivorship curves are the graphs that we make that allow us to show the probability of dying at a given age. As a case in point, let's consider this type of penguin. In the starting cohort, we have 1,000 penguins. We'll say that these 1,000 penguins hatched and the babies survive. Over time, we can see that some of these penguins disappear. Where do they go? Well, most of them become shark food, but other ones might get diseased or not have enough food to eat, so they can't survive. After the first year of life, only 324 penguins survived from the initial 1,000. 8 years later, only 138 have survived. And 16 years later, only 57 of the original 1,000 are still alive, capable of passing on their genes to the future generations if they reproduce. So by taking this data and plotting it on a graph, it allows us to make a survivorship curve. And according to the graph presented in your textbook, it says that most penguins die in their first year of life. This is especially useful to determine when we want to know what percent of individuals survive to the reproductive age, because that's what we really care about here. We want to know who can survive to pass their genes on to future generations, and then those traits might give some individuals selective advantages as environments change. Ecologists have figured out that these survivorship curves actually follow predictable patterns. Type 1 species are species that invest much energy into caring for their young, and therefore they have very low death rates early in life. Therefore, most individuals are going to grow up to sexual maturity and be capable of reproduction. Humans and other large vertebrates, such as elephants, are considered type 1 species. Type 2 species have approximately an equal probability of dying at any age. Type 2 species includes many types of birds and mammals, including squirrels that we talked about earlier. Type 3 species invest very little energy into raising their young, and therefore have very high death rates among their offspring. Those babies are born, and most of them get eaten right away. So therefore, very few individuals actually survive to the reproductive age. When you're studying for our next exam, make certain that you can describe 3 patterns of survivorship curves. Life history is the next term, and natural selection absolutely influences the life histories of many organisms. Life history is defined as including all the events of an organism's life from conception through death. The main focus of life history analysis is on the adaptations that influence their reproductive success. In general, life histories fall into two patterns shaped by natural selection. Number one is opportunistic species, and number two are referred to as equilibrium species. Opportunistic species tend to be short-lived, reproduce at an early age, and have many offspring that receive very little care. Plants, including weeds, insects, and many types of type 3 species with type 3 survivorship curves, have opportunistic life histories. On the other hand, equilibrium species tend to be long-lived, mature late, and receive extended parental care. Some types of plants can actually belong to this group. For example, the large fruits of a coconut tree are evidence of high investment in your offspring. By taking so much energy to make that coconut, it guarantees that the embryo inside the coconut will be more likely to grow into a mature palm. Birds, large mammals, and species with type 1 or type 2 survivorship curves are often referred to as equilibrium species. When you're studying for the exam, please make certain you can distinguish between opportunistic and equilibrium species. In the last part of this chapter, it's all about calculating human population growth. And this is kind of a funny quote I found online. It says, "Someone tells you that you're 1 in a million, but the world contains 7.2 billion people. That means there are 7,200 people just like you." So it kind of makes us think. We think a million is a big number, but really it's not when we consider how many humans are on our planet today. And of course, the implications that these humans have on our global resources. In fact, ecologists have calculated that human population has grown exponentially for the last 2,000 years. Questions that ecologists ask themselves are, how large will the human population be in the decades to come? For example, by the year 2050, are we going to hit 8 billion or 10 billion? And what impact will that have on our global resources? Scientists look at several factors to project human growth in the decades to come. Another question we can ask ourselves is, what is the carrying capacity of our Earth? Is there a point where we simply won't be able to maintain populations and maintain the quality of life that many of us are accustomed to? I would say that it's not about space, but it's truly about the balance of resources. It's about figuring out ways and technologies that allow for humans to coexist with the world around us. Our present human population can be calculated in terms of abundance, which is simply the number of individuals in a given place. Growth rate may be calculated as birth rate minus death rate, and we can calculate these percentages of the existing population that we add to planet Earth each and every year. I encourage you to check out the U.S. Census website and check out their population clock, which shows the current U.S. population and the current world population. Much of the current growth in the human population is due to high birth rates and low death rates in less developed countries. As we can see from this graph from our book, less developed countries are experiencing much more population growth than are the more developed countries such as the Western world. Age structure diagrams help predict trends in population growth, and we need to understand all three of these age structure diagrams for the next exam. In countries with more individuals below the reproductive age than are in their reproductive years, a population will grow, as evidenced in this graph of India. It's the so-called pyramid shape, in which there are more individuals below the reproductive age than when they grow up, and then they reproduce. The pyramid structure keeps replicating itself generation after generation. Other age structure diagrams include those that are stable or declining. The United States is an example of a stable model, and places like China that have very strict and enforceable family planning standards have actually been able to decline their population, which is important since China is the #1 populous place in the entire world. In general, birth rates tend to decline as economic development progresses, largely because of family planning programs, as well as opportunities and education for women outside of the home. It is absolutely essential that administrations and governments around the world finance these public family planning programs so that we can control our world population and have a quality of life for all, not just the wealthy nations. The human population cannot continue to grow exponentially. We are, in fact, overexploiting resources, and we need to make those changes in our lifestyle to really help accommodate these problems. In this map in our book, it shows us how much land each country would need to support the current lifestyle. And notice the United States, it swells up huge because we consume so many of our world's resources. When we're studying for the exam, make certain that you can describe these trends in human population growth and also describe which parts of the world have the highest and lowest rates of human population growth.